9 pounds, 10 ounces. Having the help. Having the great grand. Half pound. 9 pounds. I had to in La Casa.
Bienvenido. Todo eso.
Ya casi lo tengo listo. De hecho, ahorita estaba terminando.
Y encontré un colombiano. Lo que pasa es que no sé ya yo llegué a donde tenía que llegar. No puse nada. Entonces, todo lo que hice. Que tengo 11. A veces me invitan, no, ahí, pero los hijos de ahí. A ver, el gimnasio no está no tiene todo, pero ahí que tengo 4, pero 3 de No, tienes que escribir después. Te quedamos aquí. Te quedamos
Stuff with Jennifer, did you hear that they play 9,
Actually, called me Bruce.
Y no nos dejes caer en tentación, mas líbranos del mal. Amén.
I have another handout today. This is for a later period in this wonderful history of the United States and the Spanish-speaking world. I'm going to be speaking tonight on the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Okay, before we even get started, let me just ask a couple of questions. When is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo signed? You can tell me the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo.
February 2nd, 1848.
I can't believe how long before this was. Amazing. And let me tell you, I'm actually much happier when no one knows the question I ask. It makes me feel like maybe I'm bringing something that someone hasn't heard of. I'll try to bring in some esoteric considerations about the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. This is the treaty that some of you may know comes at the end of the Mexican-American War. The Mexican-American War, which, if you'll check your page, the page I just handed out, and I hope everyone gets a copy. This war takes place between 1846 and 1848, so it's a much later period than the period I talked about last time. But I think it's very important for us right now because it has to do with the relationship between the United States and Mexico. And Mexico, as we know, in 1846, is a very new nation. How old is Mexico as a nation in 1846? How old is Mexico? If its independence is 1821, it tells us it's how old? 25 years old, right? Mexico's a new nation in 1846. And when this new nation, let's talk just for a second about this new nation. Mexico, which before was Nueva España, right? Nueva España is actually one of the most important of the vice-regal areas in all of the Spanish New World. Many, many, many things are developed in Nueva España, which is basically Mexico. Nueva España it's a wonderful area, and if you know Mexico at all, you know that from the very bottom of South America, the very tip, all the way to Northern California, you see remnants of Nueva España before the existence of a new independent nation called Mexico in 1821. There are churches all over the place that predate that period. Think of the state of New Mexico. You go there, you immediately begin to see things that predate, right, the time of the new Mexican nation. long before 1821, there's a Santa Fe. Nuevo Mexico, if you remember last week, the handout, 1610. There are whole areas. If you think, for example, of the state of Texas, you think of the founding of San Antonio de Valero, you think of the missions outside of San Antonio, Texas, these all predate this. This is all part of Nueva España, which is actually part of España. That's the vice-regal name for Mexico, but it's an extension of Spain. It's still under Spanish rule. It's always Spanish rule. But when Mexico becomes a new nation in 1821, first of all, they have to pick a name for the new nation, right? They have to name themselves. They don't want to be called Nueva España anymore. They have to give themselves a new name. So how do they come up with this name? Who can tell me? I'm going to pick them all up here. But I have to be careful because I know that some of you feel uncomfortable. You won't come back. You won't have the joy of learning Spanish and working with me and Ignacio, really looking at these wonderful images, studying the handouts. So I'll wait for someone to raise their hand. Those founding fathers in Mexico decide on a name, and the name they chose was Mexico. Why did they pick this name? Who knows? Someone has their hand up. Go ahead. They named it after the Mexicans. Exactly. The people we usually call the Aztecs. Their real name, they did not call themselves Aztecs. They were Mexicas. Mexico means el centro del mundo, the center of the world. Mexico, really, another meaning of Mexico, Mexico, is el ombligo del mundo, el ombligo, the belly button of the world. They thought of themselves as the people who lived in the center. Meshi means many things. Meshi can mean moon. It can mean the part of the maguey that looks like a moon. It can mean, something round like that, but usually it's something in the middle. But the Mexicas were the people we now call the Aztecs. Ruled all of the Valley of Mexico and further south, all the way. How far did what we call the Aztec Empire, how far south did it go? You know by this name. Nicaragua means in Nahuatl, aquí termina Anáhuac. Here ends Anáhuac. Here ends Anáhuac. That's the end. In other words, here ends the places ruled by the Mexicas. Aquí termina Anáhuac. So those early thinkers between 1810 and 1820 are thinking, what are we going to call ourselves when we finally break away from the Spanish? Estos españoles horribles. They say we're going to call ourselves Mexico. Called in earlier Spanish Mexico, because the X was shut. Mexico, like the name, for example, Jimena in modern Spanish is in medieval Spanish, Doña Ximena. Doña Ximena. So the X was like an SH, so it would be the Mexica. The Mexica were the people that we now call Aztecs. Actually, the curious fact is that in Mexico, when the great naturalist Alexander von Humboldt traveled through Mexico, observing Mexico, making notes, studying Mexico, making all kinds of maps, he asked some Nahuatl speakers, so what do you call yourselves? And they said, well, we're the people from Aztlan. Aztlan. So he said, so you must be Aztecas. And actually, it was Alexander von Humboldt who came up with that term, not a Mexican. It was a German. So when you hear Mexicans, and they're fanatical about this, Everything is Aztec. I started Aztec, I keep Aztec, and this, Aztec and that. Just remember that that name came from Alexander von Humboldt. The real name is the Mexicans. When you go to the museum, the National Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology in Chapultepec, which is the greatest museum in Mexico, as far as I'm concerned, it has collections of all of these articles from all over Mexico. All these pre-Columbian materials. You won't see the name Azteca except in one place where it says Cultura Mexica, and then it has in parentheses Aztec. What we call Azteca. It should be Mexica. So there you are. Please show them that incredible building. This is actually a pillar of it. I think it's pre-Columbian, and it's from the god Tlaloc, the god of rain. You also see the wonderful calendar, right? The calendar of the Mexicas, which has 5 circles. You tell the story of the history of the world, and in the 5th circle, the Quinto Sol, that's when the world comes to an end. That's our age. Yeah. The Quinto Sol, that's our age, right? Anyway, this isn't really about the Mexicans or about any of this. It's about the Mexican-American War, which, as we know, takes place before the American Civil War. One of the most important reasons for this war, you probably would imagine, it's about land. It's about land, and in particular, it's about the disputes that continue in Texas long after the Battle of San Jacinto, after Sam Houston had defeated Santana, captured Santana, personally captured him, and signed the deal, right, for Texas's liberation from Mexico. Texas is different from the other states that form part of it, right? All of this change of hands in the mid-19th century, because Texas actually won its independence. New Mexico didn't win its independence; it was purchased. Arizona was purchased. California was purchased, right? With the Gadsden Purchase and first the Treaty of Guadalupe, that's parts of 11 American states form part of this. It's on your page. So they're still disputing parts of Texas, right? In the 1840s, so that, after 1836, the Battle of San Jacinto, which is after, of course, the Battle of the Alamo, which takes place also February 23rd to March 6th, 1836. So after this, they're still disputing, Mexico's still disputing which parts of Texas will belong to us and which will belong to the United States. They're still fighting about this. Because Texas doesn't have the same shape here as it does here. If you look at the map, it's wonderful. Ignacio is here. You see that actually Mexico includes Texas includes parts of New Mexico. It includes parts of Oklahoma. And it even includes parts of Kansas. It has a different shape later, right? Later it will take on the shape it takes now. But notice, if we think about the Mexico between, let's say, 1836 up to the beginning of the Mexican-American War, it goes way up here. It goes through the tip of Northern California, right? It's below the Arizona territory, right below the Oregon territory. Who are officially the rulers of the Oregon territory and Washington at that time? Who can tell me? It's actually the British. The British are there. Notice that the United States doesn't really go very far. It doesn't go very far west in 1846. When the war starts, it doesn't go that far west. Most of most of the West still is either still in the hands of the Spanish or native peoples. It's an area that really is, for the most part, it's not very densely populated, that's for sure. How many people besides native peoples who were there for centuries and centuries before live in what is now the state of Arizona? Very, very few. New Mexico more. Why do more live in New Mexico? More Spanish settlements. That's the answer. More Spanish settlements, a longer Spanish history, longer settlements and so on. You find a mission here and there in Arizona, but people don't live in Arizona for the most part until later. When I say people, I mean the Europeans who would come later. They just don't go there much. Notice that California, sparsely populated. Let's say 1800, sparsely populated. Why? Why is it sparsely populated in 1800? First of all, the distance, right? The distance that one has to travel to get there. But yes, that's probably more the reason for Arizona, Arizona, right? Yes.
I would say logically food, because if you can get a lot of food from, like even in New Mexico for Arizona.
Well, California's further,
Growing.
but notice also this. There might be another reason. That is, why is there this explosion that comes later? It's about the same time, isn't it? It's right after the Mexican-American War.
1849.
When you find, when gold is discovered in California, hundreds of thousands of people moved there. See, now there's a reason, but, I mean, food may be a reason, but think of this, the whole valley, Central Valley of California, is really like an area that can feed the whole country. I mean, there's plenty of space to grow, but it hasn't been cultivated yet. See, you have the Spanish missions and not much more in terms of European settlement. The Russians actually moved to California. There are Russian settlements there. And then after a while, there's some Portuguese settlements, which for the longest time remain there. There's still some small communities. But the Spanish have been there, but not very many. Not very many Spanish. So it's not densely populated until there's gold discovered. And then what American city probably grows the most, or there are a couple, because of the gold rush? See if you can name two places that you think would become very, very important because of the gold rush. One is Sacramento, which later becomes the capital of California when California becomes a state. And if you look at your page there, third, fourth from the bottom, I say these states would later become U.S. states, or these areas, these territories affected by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo would become states. California.
And Placerville.
Well, I was going to say a big city.
Oh.
Yes. It's San Francisco. Why is it San Francisco? Because that's the hub. That's the hub for all the banking, right? This is where the stores are. It's the closest city, also the port city, closest to where the gold is found. See, it's really Northern California. So that area is the area that really grows, really flourishes. And then also the railroad is beginning to take off. Notice San Francisco is a hub for that as well. So there's all this going on. But before that, we have to think about, let's think about Mexico for a second. It's a new nation. After it wins its independence, early on, there's a ruler of Mexico who says, I'm going to go ahead and just name myself. If my supporting group here agrees, I want to become emperor. He becomes an emperor of Mexico. His name was Agustín Iturbide. Agustín Iturbide becomes Emperor of Mexico, self-proclaimed. And, this lasts for a while, but the Mexicans say, no, we don't really need an emperor. What we need is a president. This emperor business doesn't work. Think for a second about US history. Do you remember this episode? Some of the supporters of George Washington said, "You are such an amazing leader. We want to make you king." And he said, "That's exactly what we don't want. That's exactly what we were fighting against. No, I will not become your king. I'm a president, not a king." The Mexicans, not long after Iturbide, said, "Well, we need to think more in Republican terms. We need a president." So the first president of Mexico, let's see what Ignacio can find when he looks up the first president of Mexico, because there's a very interesting story about the first president of Mexico. This was not his name. His name was not, his original name was not Guadalupe Victoria. What was his original name? This is a little bit tricky. He actually changed his name. When he became president, he said, "I'm going to change my name more so that my name can be more in keeping with the Mexican nation." He changed his name to Guadalupe Victoria. What does his name mean? First president of Mexico, not the first ruler after independence. Remember, that's an emperor. This is the first Mexican president. What does his name mean? Guadalupe Victoria. The victory of which Guadalupe? La Virgen de Guadalupe, the Virgin of Guadalupe. He named himself Guadalupe in honor of the Virgin Mary. Actually, from the time of Father Hidalgo, 1810, really where the roots, find the roots of the Mexican War of Independence, the flag that would be carried by the forces of Father Hidalgo and Morelos in the early the early insurgents was the image of the Virgen de Guadalupe. They were doing this in the name of the Virgen de Guadalupe. That's what happened again later in Mexican history. But Guadalupe Victoria says, "I want my name to reflect who we are. So I am now Guadalupe Victoria." And the treaty is also called Tratado de Guadalupe Hidalgo, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Why is it called that? Does anyone know? Why is it called the Treaty of Guadalupe? Treaties are usually named after the place where something is signed, right? The Treaty of Paris, etc. They're usually named. Where was this treaty signed? Have you looked at your page? Where was this treaty signed? It was actually signed. Good, I think there's more there. It was actually signed not just in the neighborhood, it was actually signed in the Basilica. It was signed in the Basilica de la Virgen de Guadalupe. Amazing story. Why would this have been the case in Mexico? Because Mexico, up to this time, still does not have separation of church and state. That comes in the time of Benito Juarez. It comes later. There is no separation of church and state in Mexico in the beginning. Only later. In fact, very different from the U.S. in this way. The founding fathers of the U.S. had a sense that it was probably better for government and religion to be separate for the good of both, right? And that great idea actually is part of the history of the US and one of the reasons why religions have flourished in the US. There is not an established religion. There is not one religion, which is the state religion, and then all the others that are, if not the state religion, enemies of the state, as we find in the history of England, especially leading up to the time of U.S. independence. It's one battle after another, one group after another. No, this is very different. So in Mexico, you still have church and state joined. So the treaty, which is the peace treaty between the United States and Mexico, after this war, which doesn't really last that long, and there aren't necessarily that many casualties, but there are casualties. The war finally settles a number of questions, or if it doesn't settle, it pretty much puts things in order, so that we now know where the border between the United States is going to be, and it's really made even more clear later. Just a short time after this treaty is signed, there's what is called the Gadsden Purchase, sort of puts the final shade on the division, the border between the U.S. and Mexico. And what is the dividing line now, after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo? What is the dividing line between these two nations? It's the river. Many times you'll find, like states, the division will be right up here, right? This is where, for example, those who know Memphis, Tennessee, you go from Arkansas, you cross this bridge, you go up like this, and come down, and you see downtown Memphis along the river there on your right. It's Arkansas and Tennessee right there. Or you'll see that little corner of Kansas that goes like this. Think of that shape, that 208 by 411 shape, which is the state of Kansas. There's a little corner that's a wavy line. That's where the river is. That's the river. Think of how many states lead up to the Mississippi River. Isn't it true of Missouri, where there's St. Louis, which is in Missouri, and East St. Louis, right? Not a part of the state of Missouri, right? It's on the other side. Kansas City, Kansas, Kansas City, Missouri, so on. Well, here it's this river that is called by some Mexicans the Rio Bravo, which is kind of a strange name, right? What does Rio Bravo mean? The wild, it's like the wild, crazy river. For us, usually it's pretty much a place where you can just kind of walk across, right? And in many areas, pretty shallow. Not all, but in many areas, pretty shallow, right? So looking at your page, let's look at it a little bit. So we see that the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo gave the U.S. the Rio Grande as the southern border. It shapes Texas, but it also gave the U.S. ownership of California. Just think how much that would be worth now. I mean, 5 houses just in Venice. It'd be $10 million, right? So it gives ownership of California, half of New Mexico. That's going to be all of New Mexico later. Most of Arizona, again, the Gadsden Purchase, which comes a little later, settles this. Nevada, Utah, Colorado, and smaller parts of, usually corners of Wyoming, Kansas, and even Oklahoma. Here, the Panhandle. Even Oklahoma. Look how close this is to all of us. All of this. How big an area is this? I think I have the number here. It is 525,000 square miles, which is really over a third of Mexico handed over to the United States after this war. Just that gold was discovered. So you can't say, well, gold was discovered, so we went to war. No, actually, this comes afterwards. Texas is already from 1845, a year before the war starts, there's already a Texas that exists independently, but the borders aren't fully established yet. All of this takes shape afterwards. If you look at this part right here, this white part, tell me what that white part was before this time. Who can tell me? It's the Louisiana Purchase, isn't it? It's the Louisiana Purchase. So if we just really, this is a very simple way to look at U.S. history. It's in the time of Thomas Jefferson, early 19th century. He makes a deal with France, and he purchases what we call now the Louisiana Purchase. It's all this area. That's the Louisiana Purchase, because you see the rest of it is under Spanish rule. More of it, almost all of this had been under Spanish rule until they had lost in the early 19th century those territories to France, right? But if you think of U.S. history, if you think of where the Mississippi River is, that was the West in the United States. St. Louis is called sometimes the gateway to the West. That's what that arch is about. This was the United States here. So there, in the early 19th century, Thomas Jefferson made sort of a purchase of all this area, the Louisiana Purchase, and then mid-century, the war with Mexico, the U.S. ends up with all of this area after that war. What happens? What happens? The U.S. agrees to pay $15 million, payments of $3 million a year. It's very important to remember, though, that although these areas are now cooked, they're all rich, beautiful, wonderful areas for us to visit. At the time, sparsely populated. Not only sparsely populated, but in many areas, in fact, up until 1870, many of the areas in Texas are still overrun by Comanches, other native groups that are constantly at war. In New Mexico, this goes on and on and on. The Spanish arrived, overrun by Europeans, then kicked out for a while. They kicked the Europeans out for a while, then they come back. It's actually native land from centuries before, millennia in New Mexico, right? The Pueblos and so on. But they come in, the Europeans come in, it's the Spanish. They're kicked out for a while, then they come back. It's a constant struggle. Arizona also. It's very difficult. I mean, and also, it was very hard for Mexico. And the Mexican government makes the decision in approximately 1830, maybe 31, 10 years after the founding of the new nation, that we really need to have a central government. We need to have a central government so that everything, right, can be ruled administratively from a center. And that center, of course, is going to be Mexico City. Well, the problem is, if you're talking about the 1840s, Mexico City is a long way from Arizona, from California, even from Texas. The mode of transportation, what sort of transportation do we have that? If you can't go there from the coast on the outside, you're going to have to go there probably walking or on horseback. It takes Santana a long time to get to the Alamo in San Antonio. A long time. They know he's coming, for a long time before he gets there. You're dragging cannons along, dragging supplies along. It takes forever to get there. So we know, of course, as I said, that the treaty adds 525,000 square miles to the U.S. It also gave the Mexicans who lived in that area a chance to move to other Mexican states, which in some cases are thriving at that time, and about 3,000 people leave, but the majority decided to stay. We live here, we've lived here in their minds always, we'll just go ahead and stay. They do stay. They don't know what's gonna happen, but it's clear to some people, like someone like Sam Houston, who says, sooner or later, this all is gonna be part of the United States of America. It's just a matter of time, right? Going back to that list of the territories affected, except for Texas, which was already a state by 1845. And by the way, and Texas becomes early on a slave state, becomes part of the Confederacy. One of the reasons why many people from southern states decide to move to Texas is because Texas is wide open, you can have land, there's lots of opportunity, and you can take your slaves with you. Slavery was banned in Mexico before 1845, and so that's enough. But it continues in the U.S. until when? When is slavery finally abolished in the United States of America? It's during the Civil War. The Emancipation Proclamation is during the Civil War. As we know, Abraham Lincoln. Yes.
They're definitely getting Mexican war, something there.
What happened in Puebla, does anyone?
Because I visited the home.
Actually, it's going to be on this page further down. I'll come to it. That's a very good question. Because you're thinking of the era, you're thinking of the area, right? You're thinking of General Zaragoza, who, as we know, was born in what is now the state of Texas, in the Presidio, near Victoria, Texas. Right. Continuing, 1865, Benito Juarez becomes president of Mexico for the first time. He'll be president again later. I'm sorry, 1858. It's 1858. Benito Juarez becomes president of Mexico. Very interesting guy. I want to talk a little bit about Benito Juarez. If you'll look at Benito Juarez, images of Benito Juarez, lived a long life. He actually was a Native American. As an orphan, he was taken in by an uncle, later sent to religious schools. His native language was Zapoteca. The land that belonged to the Zapotecas was the land we now call Oaxaca. All that area is the Zapotecas. That's where Benito Juarez was from. He studied law. He became an important lawyer. He becomes after and before Santana, because Santana also becomes Santa Anna, as we say in English, because he's president more than once. Benito Juarez in Mexico is like the Abraham Lincoln of Mexico. He begins what is called in Mexico La Reforma. The Reforma, and if you think of the major thoroughfare in Mexico City, Avenida de la Reforma, the reform, what reform? Separation of church and state. Benito Juarez, though taught by people in a religious community, though he had the opportunity to go to school, which was very unusual for Native American at the time. In fact, in Mexico, not very many people had the opportunity to go to school, probably in the 1850s and 1840s. Benito Juarez, think of all the places named after the Avenida Juarez, all over Mexico, the city. Juarez now on the border, right across from what American city? The city known in Spanish as El Paso del Norte, the North Pass. El Paso del Norte. That's where the city named after Benito Juarez is. But there are other cities named after Juarez. Streets all over Mexico, monuments all over Mexico to Benito Juarez. He begins the liberal reform of Mexico, separating church and state, and decides he's going to confiscate all church property. And is off to a pretty good start, but then something happens, and I think if you get like a Mexican history of this part of Mexico, there's hardly ever mention of this, but the fact that the U.S. between 1861 and 1865 has a civil war going on, raging on, has a huge impact on Mexico. Why? Why does it have a huge impact on Mexico? Because the U.S. is so involved in its own civil war, we don't know in the beginnings if the Union is going to survive, right? That there's no one there to enforce Monroe Doctrine. What is the Monroe Doctrine? Can you help me? What's the Monroe Doctrine? The doctrine that the United States will not allow any foreign power to enter to the Western Hemisphere. If it should happen, the United States will be there to attack and defend. But while the United States is involved in its own war, the French get involved in Mexico. They say, this is the perfect time for us to expand our empire. This is the perfect time for us to take control of an area that's there for the taking. They said, let's see if we can find the right person to go there as our ambassador, as our leader, in fact, as an emperor. And they select a young man who has many gifts, clearly a very talented, smart young man who's tall, he's well-spoken, a group of rich landowners in Mexico travel to meet this young man, who we know now as Ferdinand Maximiliano in Spanish. They go meet him. He's in Austria. But the French decide he will be that person they will send to Mexico, saying he's been invited by the Mexican people because this group of very influential goes. There's Maximiliano. He was in his 30s when he died. He was in his 30s, and his wife was in her 20s. What was her name? No, it wasn't Isabella. It was Carlota. Charlotte. Charlotte was her name. One of my grandmothers. Her name was Carlota. And so Maximiliano says, they want me, so I'm going. She goes with his young wife. They move to Mexico. There's a palace for them. Where's the palace? Yes, we're in Mexico City, do you know? It's where the museum is. Chapultepec, the hill of the grasshopper. Chapultepec in Nahuatl, right? Chapulín is the word for grasshopper. Chapultepec, Chapultepec in modern Spanish. There, this young man, Maximilian, says, I want to build a road from here, from where the Castillo is, all the way to the Basilica, the Great Guadalupano. And that road, later, in the time of Benito Juarez, will be called Reforma. But before that, it's actually the way that leads from Chapultepec here to the Basilica of La Virgen de Guadalupe. Of course, after the war, the U.S. Civil War, Maximiliano doesn't have a chance. The French abandon him. He's captured later in Querétaro, very important city in Mexico. He's captured by Benito Juarez, and Benito Juarez himself orders his execution. There, Maximiliano and the Cerro de las Campanas, the Hill of the Bells, is executed. and he was, I believe, 36 years old. His widow at one time would go crazy. So much so that she would have to be institutionalized, but she would live 60 more years. She died, I believe, in 1926. Do that. Still alive, there are photographs of her being escorted down the street. She died in Belgium, I believe, either in Bruges or Ghent. Very sad story, true story. It's romanticized by many Mexicans, but under no circumstances was Benito Juarez going to allow Maximiliano to survive. So there you have it, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the U.S. Civil War, Benito Juarez, short reign of Maximiliano. One of those early battles with the French takes place in Puebla. It's on the 5th of May, Cinco de Mayo, where in Puebla, at the fort of Guadalupe, the French are defeated. That's the Mexican story. Only to be defeated later by the French who returned. Isn't that a great story? Muchas gracias. If anyone has any questions, they can come up after. I'm sorry that I stayed too long, so it's almost 5 o'clock. Does everyone know who their teacher is? If you will, you need to come up.
I wasn't worried. I was like, she's gonna show up in that bigger class.
Our original room from the first day. I already
Oh, I think that guy's got a lot
Thanks for the heads up.